Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the Fireside chat where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am absolutely honoured and humbled to be joined by someone who I feel privileged to call a friend, but someone who's also incredibly inspirational. His name is John Williams. John is the executive chef, and we're actually sitting at the moment in the kitchens of the Ritz Hotel in London. Today, I'm really keen to share with all of our listeners and our viewers some of the stories of John's earlier career and how he came to be where he is today. John was actually the son of a Tyneside fisherman. He was taught to cook at a very young age by his mother and then went on to go to South Shields College. Following on from that, he actually then went to Westminster College where he learned culinary arts. He had 18 years working at the Savoy Group before coming here to be the executive chef at the Ritz and heading up a kitchen of over 60 chefs and managing multiple different areas of the kitchen and all of the wide array of menus that are here within the hotel's remit. In addition, John has done a huge amount for charity, and he's also been the recipient of a royal warrant for banqueting and catering services from His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. In addition, the Ritz has also been awarded a Michelin-Starred for the level of service to the catering industry. And so I'm delighted to welcome John today to the show and really to learn a little bit more about him and his background to share with all of you today. John, welcome to the show.
Well, welcome Leila into my humble little office in the Ritz kitchens. Where can I start? At the beginning?
Yeah, so, I mean, really, obviously, so many people know you, and I am actually even a little bit nervous interviewing you today because actually there's so many different things that you've done and you've had such a spectacular career. I thought what would be really nice today is to touch on some of the amazing things that you've done, but also to maybe share with our listeners a little bit about your personal background, because obviously you've come from, you know, being the son of a fisherman to literally heading up one of the most famous restaurants in the world as executive chef. It would be great to learn how you kind of actually got to that position, because I'm sure it was a hell of a lot of hard work and dedication.
I've just thought of something. First of all, you're correct. My dad was a fisherman. My mother had to bring up 6 kids, and I was the second oldest. And I certainly really enjoyed food. I think that's very important. So much so, my mum would always remind me, she had twins after me, and they were 2 years younger. And I used to wake up in the afternoon and she had fed the babies as they were then, and I would steal the Farley's rusks and hide underneath the bed. So I was a bit of a gourmet even then, for rusks anyway.
Oh, I love Farley's rusks.
Anyway, but moving on, my mother really needed help. And for some reason, she actually chose me. And it started with going shopping, going for food that my dad liked. And my dad wasn't the normal run-of-the-mill kind of man. He loved tripe. He loved curries. He loved, old-fashioned pork butchers, and all kinds of, what I would call food that not a lot of people would actually eat. He never missed black pudding. He loved black pudding. And realistically, my mother, would take me shopping. And then, on a Sunday, the best memory that I've actually got, I used to play football. I was football crazy. And I used to play over the back fence, and on a Sunday morning, my mother shouted across, "John, come in and give us a hand." So off I went. And my first job that I particularly remember was scraping Jersey Royals. And she had a roast shoulder of lamb. And it was obviously a nice springtime, June type of time of year. And I scraped these jerseys and she cooked them. And before lunch, she actually gave me 4 Jersey Royals sitting on a plate as a treat for actually cooking, and with melted butter on top. And do you know what? It is the most amazing taste that I can still remember. I had to make the mint sauce as well. She used to make it in a cup. Chopped mint, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of water, and a little bit of vinegar. And she used to bake it in the oven. I mean, it worked. But it was little things like that where it really started. But it was very much out of necessity. You can imagine having 6 kids and a mother having to run after them. She was mother, father, everything to us. And it was a tough time, the realistic situation. But it was something that I never even thought of, because you just did it. You had to do it. And I loved food. I wouldn't go to school dinners when I was a young lad because I hated them. And my mother used to have to come from work so she could actually feed me. Everybody else went to dinners, but I said, no way.
So you're very particular from a young age already.
I think it must have been there. Anyway, I actually was also very much inspired by the Galloping Gourmet. And the Galloping Gourmet was a man called Grain Kerr. And he used to travel to all the great restaurants in the world, come back into the studio, he'd try to reproduce it. It wasn't a very good job, but he always had the most beautiful wines as well. And he would try to recreate, and he would actually place these 3 plates on a very long table, one for him and one either side. Then he'd run into the audience, get the 2 most beautiful ladies there were, and he would actually pull them, put them either side, pour the wine, have a big mouthful, and he'd go, "Oh, I've arrived." And he's looking at these 2 girls, and I'm saying, "Yeah, I want some of that. By the way, I'm still looking." But it was very, very inspirational. And I was very fortunate to go from school, from a 14-year-old, into South Shields Marine and Technical College on a link course where I had a professional chef teach me instead of domestic science. And 4 other guys followed me to do this. So I went through this process, and I remember the chef saying to me after the first lesson, he says, "You really like this, don't you?" I said, "Oh, I love this, man. I love this." And he would always talk about London. Anyway, I got my first job in a very small hotel in Otterburn called the Percy Arms. And my very first job was plucking grouse. I mean, this was a man coming from South Shields. It was fish. And I had never heard of a grouse before. And I had to pluck about 40 birds. Anyway, the smell was something else. But now, the first day of the grouse season, I'm the first one there wanting to smell them because it's such a beautiful aroma, but then it was almost sickly.
And it reminds you of your early days in the kitchen,
100%.
Clearly.
And you know, those are the things that actually you never forget. You never forget them. And yes, it was hard work. I started off, I had 5 split shifts a week. I used to have to do 2 breakfasts a week. And then I used to go to college on my day off. And for the privilege of that, I got paid a very large amount of £9 per week.
Oh, wow.
It was so small, I couldn't pay tax. It was under the tax threshold.
Oh my goodness.
And I stayed there for 6 months, and it was quite inspirational. I had a general manager's wife who was a French lady, and her father was a director of Le Doyen restaurant. Le Doyen restaurant is a 3-star restaurant, has been for many, many years in Paris. And she used to bring me all kinds of different foods, and call it whatever. I just said to myself, something was ticking inside me, saying, if I want to cook the food that I want to cook, because I had something in my mind, I wanted to cook posh food and foods that I hadn't seen in the Northeast. I wanted to cook food from around the world. And basically, I actually said, okay, I've got to move to London. That's the only place where I can get what I really want to do. So I made an application, and I got a telephone call. And the next thing I knew, I was giving a week's notice, and I was actually moving on to London.
Wow.
I came to London with a couple of bags. I got on a bus from the Northeast. I said to my mum, I says, Mum, I've got to go. It's as simple as that. And she said, well, if that's what's going to make you happy, lad. Off I went. I was down in London for 11 and a half months. Notice the precision. And I was homesick. Like I couldn't explain. I was really homesick. In the end, I said, nah, I've got to go back home. I went to the back to the Northeast, and my mum was over the moon that I was actually back. And they give me a rise in the Northeast in the hotel that I went to work there because I had London experience. And I'm still only not quite 18. But I only stayed for 3 shifts. I didn't enjoy it. It was very different to London as far as I was concerned. The whole thing just didn't fit. And I knew I had made a very big mistake. So I telephoned my boss that I had just left, and I says, I've made a mistake, and I wonder if I can come back. He says, I'll see you next Monday. And I came back to London within a week. And I said to my mum, I says, listen, I know what I'm doing now. I've just got to go on. And all along, I wanted to cook very, very special food. So once I got to the Royal Garden, there were different areas. They had a very fine restaurant, a French restaurant called the Royal Roof. And there were about 10 people in the brigade. There were some 8 French chefs and 2 Japanese who were absolutely amazing. But they were just cooking at a different level. I said, this is what I want to do. I stayed there. In actual fact, I stayed in the Royal Garden totally after that for another 7 years. And I worked in banqueting, in all of the different sections. It's hard work, but it's very international. Kitchens are very, very international. And I was learning this, that, and the other, and I knew I was placing myself in the right place to learn how to make sauces, to cook fish, etc., whether it was for a massive big banquet or an individual plate. And it was in my head, this was very, very important to learn how to manage, etc. So we carried on cooking there, and I eventually became the sous chef in the Royal Garden. I was only 21. Can you imagine?
Incredible.
And it was probably too early, in actual fact, but my boss, Mr. Remy Fougère, really looked after me, a little bit like a father in a lot of ways. And he said, okay, you can do this. And I said, no, I want to go back in the roof. I went back into the roof kitchen, and I became chef there. And once I arrived to that, my mind started to actually say, what do I really need to do? I was wanting to go to France. I was keep getting knocked back by all the great chefs of France that you'd write a letter to them and they'd send a letter back saying, oh, very sorry, but my brigade is full for the next 3 years.
What kept you going through being resilient over the years? Because obviously the massive change between being up in the northeast through to being in London, I mean, the differential between the 2 locations are huge in and to themselves, you know, so actually kind of driving all the time for new, different things that you've never seen before is...
One thing, it was the cooking. And it was this desire to learn, the desire to understand. But most of all, I really enjoy my food. And every time I learned something that really satisfied me, it really drove me on. So I didn't mind at all what I was working, all I wanted to do. You know, the kitchen, and in those particular days, it wasn't exactly masses of hours, but I was there 2 or 3 hours before, because I just wanted to do the things that I wanted in the way that I wanted. And it was hard work, but if you enjoy something, it's not so, tough to actually get through. But I had a very, very specific goal. I wanted to be a person that was recognized for good cooking, good hospitality, and good all-round restaurant business. This was an important fact to me quite young. So I was always thinking of what I could do. And I would often put my notice in because I had got a new job to try and my boss, Remy Fougère, would say to me, no, there's another £10, I'm going to promote you, and I would stay. But eventually it got to the point where I had been there nearly 8 years. And he said to me, do you know what? I think it's time for you to leave. And I thought, that's a strange thing for him to say. And I said, why do you say that? He says, because I've got a job for you. I said, what's that? He says, I'm opening a restaurant. He said, I want you to run it. Oh, God. And I thought, wow. Now, at that time, it was a very special time. It was right at the start of what we call the chef patron. And he says, you can be the chef patron. I went, wow. And I would go in there, and it was probably the hardest I ever worked in my life. I was about 26. And when I say worked hard, I worked hard. I worked 6 days a week, and I used to go to the market twice a week. So I'd be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would get home at 12:30 at night on those particular days. But it was because I thought, we're getting a bargain. I was selecting the product. So it was another thing already where I was actually in control and trying to make sure that we were actually getting the best possible product. After a while, it came to a crossroads. By the time I was 27 and a half, I said, you know what? I've tried restaurants, I've tried hotels. I need to actually buckle down and see where I wanted to be. And I made a decision that hotels were going to be the right thing for me. It was a lot to do with the whole diversity within hotels, because you've got different kinds of people. People come from all walks of life, and I mean that. You know, we've got some of the most richest people in the world that will end up working in hospitality, and then you've got some of the most poor people who come into the industry, but it's just one hell of a mix. And that's what makes it fun. It does, it really makes it fun. And I thought, right, this is what I want to do. And I was fortunate enough to be offered to go for an interview from somebody, a man called Mario Leshnik, who was the executive chef, and I had met him a couple of times before, in Claridge's. And I went there, and he says, we need somebody like you. And I was offered at 27 and a half, the executive sous chef in Claridge's. Not before, I might add. The day after, he said, oh, can you pop in? And I popped in. I says, well, I'm not really dressed for an interview or anything. He says, no, don't worry. He says, there's only somebody who wants to say hello. Well, I went upstairs. There was something like 7 people sitting on a panel asking questions. And it's anybody that knows me, I always like to wear a tie if I'm going anywhere. This particular day, I didn't have a tie on. So that will tell you. And I was only 27 and a half.
Oh, bless you.
But Mr. Ron Jones, who was the general manager director of the Ritz, of Claridge's at the time, offered me the job. And I said, wow. And that was it. And when I got into Claridge's, immediately I said, this is what I want. And you know, it's about the people that you serve. That's what actually intrigued me. You know, and it's not about, I think it's very important. Anybody asks me which people stay in the Ritz or anything, I'll say, you know what? Don't really know. But if somebody says to me, oh, there's a head of state or there's somebody from the royal family, I get excited. That does really excite me. And of course, some of the clients were very, very special clients. And suddenly I had freedom. Freedom with using, remember what I said, I wanted to go for these ingredients, where all of these ingredients were there. And not only that, it was like a kid in a candy shop.
Candy store.
Yeah, and I just wanted to play. And I had to be very regimented in making sure that everything was working. I was only 27. There was guys 50, 60-year-old that they were reporting to me, and I had to actually learn how to manage and make sure that I was respectful to them, to make sure I was actually getting them to work for me. That was a massive challenge. But I always believe, as a chef, if you can cook better than any of the other cooks, they will follow. And one of the things I always actually utilize, just make it as good as you can so that they can see that your heart and soul is in that job. And it is very, very important. But I overcame that. I actually stayed 9 years in Claridge's. And I got to the point where I got married, I had 2 children, and my mind is now starting to change and say, I've got to think of actually my future and how I'm actually going to operate. And there was one thing very particular, and remember, when you go to Claridge's, it's one hell of a platform. Mm-hmm. It's probably the second best hotel in London at the moment. Mm-hmm. You know which one the number one is.
Of course, of course.
And at that particular time, you know, I said, I've got to be a chef in one of the very, very finest establishments. Now, as far as I was concerned, there was only 5 hotels at that particular point. And, you know, a lot of them were in the Savoy Group. Mm-hmm. The Ritz was very high on my agenda. But what actually happened, the managing director at the time said to me, he says, John, he says, you are going to be the next chef in the Berkeley. And I said, wonderful. But I was waiting and waiting. And I almost left because I said, I have to move. I need more income. So the only way I was going to get that was to move up and become executive chef. And when he heard that, he was devastated. And he said, you'll not move. He says, I will make it happen. And lo and behold, within 3 months, I was executive chef of the Berkeley. So here I've got the first big platform for myself. And I said, well, I've got to just change everything. So I think I was a little bit like a whirlwind. I have a couple of people that I'm still in touch with when they work with me. He says, I've never seen anything like it. I thought I was actually quite casual and quite slow in change. He says, you changed everything in the first 2 days.
Well, clearly it's working though, because obviously you've achieved the Michelin-Starred and then also the very prestigious award from His Royal Highness. Do you ever pinch yourself and think, oh my goodness, I've come so far from being, you know, a lowly fisherman's son up in the northeast to now being at the helm of one of the most famous restaurants and hotels in the world?
It's an interesting one, but you know, it's a natural progression, isn't it? Of course, when you look back on it, you say, yeah, little Johnny from South Shields, look at what I'm doing now. But it is very much a process. It's a natural progression that anyone can do. Mm-hmm. What does it take? It takes a little bit of hard work. Mm-hmm. And I think the harder I worked, the luckier that I became. I think there's a lot to say for that.
It's a great saying that.
Yeah.
The harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
And if it's okay with you, I'd love just to speak very briefly about kind of social mobility and also maybe even give advice to anyone who might be listening in today who's aspiring in their career, maybe to be like yourself or to reach those starry heights of working within an organisation and kind of making it to the top. But I think you are you're living proof that someone who is really hardworking, resilient from a real working class family can make it to this point. You know, is there anything that you would say or advice that you give to some of the young chefs that you work with when they're finding things tough and they're really trying to, make their way up the corporate ladder?
You've just reminded me of something there. When I got off the bus, the first time I came to London and was brought into the reception of the hotel, I was very nervous of my accent. And I was because I wanted to get on. I didn't think that the Geordies were allowed to get on. That's a God's honest truth. So but the funny thing was, have I lost my accent?
I still think that you have it.
I have.
A lot.
And the reality of it is, though, but it was something there. And I really believe that you should take people for what they are and how they do things. And, you know, all it takes is a little bit of hard work, a little bit of thought process. You know, yes, educate yourself, by all means. I mean, can you imagine my education? Eating food and tasting and working to get it. And of course, drinking a little bit of wine. What kind of job gives you that? And I've visited some of the best restaurants in the world. Do you think I would have been able to do that if I was just doing a normal job? So that's the luxury of actually working in the environments that I do. I mean, when I was at the point of leaving Claridge's, I didn't stay in the Berkeley long. I only stayed there for 18 months. And the managing director of the Savoy Group telephoned me one day. He said, well, the position's come good. He said, we want you back in Claridge's. I cried. I simply, I thought, this is me. John Williams is going to be chef of of Claridge's. And I telephoned. I remember crying over the phone to my wife. And lo and behold, I went back and I had 9 years there, cooking for kings, queens, heads of state. I've done royal banquets. It is absolutely amazing. But there was one big hurdle that hadn't actually quite come in, and that was the Ritz. Because when I was sous chef, I had applied to come and work in the Ritz. And the general manager was Mr. Terry Holmes, who's a fantastic man. And he interviewed me, he came and ate my food, and he wrote me this beautiful letter, which I still have today. He said, my dear John, he says, I just want you to know that, I've really enjoyed your food to the maximum. It is some beautiful, beautiful food. He said, however, you haven't been an executive chef before, and I need to take on an experienced executive chef. And that turned out, in actual fact, what I should have told you, the Times newspaper, there was a published article which actually showed the bookmakers were gambling on who was going to be the next chef of the Ritz, and I was second favourite. And the favourite one, Mr. David Nichols, because he had this experience. So I kept that in my mind.
But it didn't stop you at all, did it?
No, there's a little circle there. Very recently, wasn't long ago, a couple of years ago, Terry Holmes came in and I said, I've still got that letter and you made one hell of a mistake. He says, maybe I did. But it was just in jest, and it was really, really fantastic. So I didn't go then, and then I was offered the job 3 times to come down to the Ritz before I eventually came down. And when I came, I said, I've arrived home. That was it. There was something here, the building, the fact that Cesar Ritz started this and the legacy that this hotel has, the environment. I love the style that we have here. And I knew that I wanted to build something that fitted. And, it's not about the chef in the Ritz. It's about the building, the platform.
The experience.
Yeah, the platform in that restaurant and the whole dining experience is so important. So it starts with the style of the room, the kind of tabletop. You have to have silver. Now, we had lost some of the edge, but we've really built that back. And of course, the food then has to really follow. And that's what I like to think that we've been trying to build. And that's why I have such a joy, because it is what I enjoy. It is what I want to cook. It's what I was put on this earth for. And the whole place just drives me on. And I don't come to work each day. I come and have fun.
This is what I love about speaking to you, is I can feel the passion physically radiating off you every time I come and see you, or every time I have the opportunity to experience an element of being here at the Ritz, whether it's eating or coming to chat with some of the staff here. But you mentioned the word legacy before, and I think that's definitely something that really resonates with me, and I'm sure would resonate with many people that have worked with you over the years and people who are at the Ritz. Could you talk to us a little bit about the legacy that you want to leave and some of the legacy that you're developing throughout the young chefs and the chefs within the kitchen that you're really inspiring and nurturing and cultivating to be able to keep this magic alive?
That is so important. There's 2 factors there. I have an apprenticeship scheme. And my 2 key people that work directly under me and my pastry chef, who are all on the same kind of level, they're the people that make the magic happen. I can orchestrate it, but they are the people that make it happen. And you know what? Every one of those guys have been trained here through the Royal Academy's apprenticeship scheme. The Spencer Metzger, who is my number 2, he came here as a 14-year-old on a work placement.
Wow.
And he's 27 now.
And now he's number 2.
And you know what? This chap he's learned from me, but he is going way beyond what I will ever do because of technology, because of modern ways that we actually do things. These guys will be so much better. I've got another one in Deepak Malia. And Deepak is probably the best saucier in London today. But they've both come through the same channel, the apprenticeship scheme. So they learned here and they've actually focused, and they come from the same backgrounds as myself. But you know what? They love food and they have a desire to really make people happy. And that's the beauty of it. If you want to make people happy, I don't want people to think that it's not hard work. I promise you, it is hard work. A kitchen is very, very hard work. But if you love it, it becomes so much easier. And for me, it's about having them carry on the style of work, you know, with the right mentality, the right kind of leadership, and making sure that they show the Ritz in the very, very best light for the next 50 years, and that it's actually kept in the tradition that it should be. It's so important, so much so. The one thing that I've wanted to do in my life, you mentioned legacy, I've got to mention this, because it's something that I am very, very proud of, and I've waited a long time to actually be able to do it. And I always wanted to do a Ritz cookery book. And I've been very, very patient, and just, 18 months ago, we actually produced that.
It's spectacular. I have my signed copy in the kitchen at home.
Have you?
Yeah, as do my mum and dad, and my husband's mum and dad as well.
But you know, that what it is very much a snapshot of what the Ritz was cooking at this particular period in time. And you know, in 30 years or 40 years, I just hope that people that are cooking will come back to those dishes and say, I want to do that dish because the Ritz were doing it like that, and that's the way they cook then. But it's very relevant now, because what I also believe in, that good cooking is always about relevance. If it's not relevant today, people will not come and eat, because you can't eat exactly the same food as what we were doing even 30 years ago. Food has become so much lighter, and it will continue to do so. And it will change in its whole entirety. But taste doesn't. Things have to taste good.
Taste never goes out of fashion.
Exactly,
does it?
exactly. So these are important things for me, you know. And I mean, as far as leadership and things, there's nothing more important than honesty, integrity to your staff, to the people that you work for. Without that, you don't go anywhere. I think you have to listen. At times, I'm probably not the best listener, but I try hard. And I think the more you listen, the better you become. But it is so important to look after the people that you have. We all know kitchens, you know, work very hard and they're tough environments. However, the cooks have to feel that their leader is looking after them. And they should.
It's about fostering that sense of belonging. And
100%.
On the subject, I guess, of diversity and inclusion, you know, you've mentioned before that diversity and inclusivity, which is essentially the belonging piece that you mentioned, where everyone feels at home, is very, very important. I wondered, firstly, kind of what diversity and inclusion means to you, and also whether you could perhaps tell us a little bit about the mixture of different chefs that you have in the kitchen that we're sitting in the middle of right now.
I think, first and foremost, you know, everybody knows there's a shortage of chefs. They can't get them. My view is that anyone can come through the door and actually make an appointment to see me and look at a job. If I think you can do it and you're willing enough, you're there. So you've got half a foot in the door straight away. What is actually very, very important is that everyone is open to whomever. And the moment that you've actually got that, you've got a chance, because that's how kitchens work. That's how you build a good team, because you need a mixture of people. I always use the word of Sir Alex Ferguson, you know, how he would actually build a team. And he'd never want more than one centre forward. And that's the way I say it. I say, I don't want more than one great sauce here. I need a great poissonnier as well. So it's about actually putting people in place. And there's a place for everyone in kitchens. I mean, my brigade, I think I have probably about 65 currently. There's probably about 35 British. But after that, there's all parts of the world. And I'm serious about that. I've got one particular chap, an Indian, who's worked for me for, I think it's about 37 years. And he came with me from Claridge's. He's in charge of making the sandwiches and everything. And, you know, he's very proud that he's been together with me longer than anyone else. And he's very proud, and I'm very proud that he's actually been there. But he enjoys what he does. I've got people from South America. I've got people from South Africa. I've got Australian. I've got Chinese. I've got Malayan. I've got Canadian, you know, French, Italian, German. You know, that's what makes a good kitchen. It really does. It actually enhances it. So it is very, very important in every sense of the word. And kitchens are a bubbling stockpot of people, if you like. And that's what makes them really good. And there's one thing that we mustn't forget. Do you know one of the most important things in my book as far as people are concerned? If you don't have enough women in the kitchen, that changes the atmosphere. And I think I've got about 30% at this particular moment. There's certainly 20 ladies in there. And I love to have ladies. Do you know why?
Why?
They keep the men in check. And there are tasks that ladies can do, men are no good at. Mm-hmm. I promise. And
it's so interesting, because biologically, obviously, we are different, but it 100%. Is...
But they bring a strength to the kitchen that men alone cannot do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important. And that just shows how a kitchen and how diverse a kitchen needs to be. Not that I'm, just saying, oh, we need to have it. It needs to be to make it at its top level.
Absolutely. But I think the diversity that you're explaining is not just gender diversity, it's not just international diversity. Actually, it's like everyone is welcome to the party, and I love...
Everyone. And that's the important factor. I don't think there's nothing that I wouldn't actually look at, because it's very plain and simple. If you have a desire to do a job, and the more of this diversity you have, the better you become. I really promise you that.
Thanks so much, John. And I wonder, just before we wrap up, whether I can go into a super quick lightning round and just ask you another couple of quick questions, if that's okay. But I wondered, first of all, what is your secret to success? Or the secret sauce to success, even, since we're in the kitchen?
The Ritz.
The Ritz.
The Ritz is a success. Mm-hmm. I'm just part of it.
Mm-hmm. That's very humble of you, and I should have expected that you would say something like this. But what you're saying is basically it's about everyone else and you being a part of that wider jigsaw.
Honestly, I'm just the person that's actually doing the orchestra.
Mm-hmm. But if you were to give advice to, say, the young Johnny and your younger self, would there be anything that you might say to encourage yourself, or even to anyone else who's listening in and watching today thinking, God, I'd love to be in that position, or I'd love to...
I think there's a couple of things. Find a job that you enjoy. Mm-hmm. I think that's very, very important. And then there's a couple of things. One is work very hard. Learn as much as you can. And secondly, obviously you need to have a growth plan. Mm-hmm. But the harder you work, with honesty, integrity, and happiness, mm-hmm. believe me, it all fits into place.
Really wise words, and I completely concur with you on the harder you work, the luckier you get, because you 100%. Never know what's around the corner. Life is like a labyrinth, isn't it? If you didn't just work that extra half an hour, you didn't just go and speak to that one extra person, that could have led to something which is really wonderful and life-changing. And clearly, from all the experience that you mentioned throughout your career, these fortuitous meetings and things that have happened have really kind of led you to be where you are today.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm. And I wondered as well, who's inspired you the most throughout your career or even your life?
Well, there's a couple of people really, and they're chefs. Number one, everything comes from Escoffier. So for me, Escoffier has been a real inspiration right from day one with his cooking methods. And we still use a lot. Chefs, modern day chefs say, Escoffier is not relevant now. Let me tell you, 100% he is totally relevant. And the basis of everything that we cook now is still very much relevant. The trick is to actually make the food lighter. And he, for me, was definitely the best cook of his era of the century last century. But what also is important to me, and a man that I really looked up to, was a man called Michel Bourdin. And Michel Bourdin was a hotel chef in the Connaught. And he really looked after me. In actual fact, I remember one day he said to me, he says, "You must come to the academy." He said, "Because one day I want you to run it. I'm now chairman of the Royal Academy of Culinary Arts." And he was the one that used to say, "We have to make it a Royal Academy." But he was a great cook. He really enjoyed a bon vivant, very, very hard-working man, and just loved to cook and serve. So those people really are the ones that inspired me within my industry, as it were.
And finally, I know you've mentioned a number of the inspirations you've had throughout your career, but I wondered, were there any final last words of wisdom or a quote other than the one that we've mentioned about the harder you work, the luckier you get, that you would like to kind of finish things on before I summarise for everyone who's been listening in today?
That's a good one. I think I've used all my little words up as far as that. But I think to be a good leader, I think the most important, honesty. The more honest you are, you get up in the morning with a clear head, you work hard, and you go to sleep very, very well at night. And the more honest you are, I just think it works so well. When you're cooking, if you're dishonest with yourself, i.e. say, that little bit, we'll just forget about that, you'll never improve. So you have to actually make decisions to yourself all the time to say, no, that's not good enough, do it again. But it's got to come within rather than for someone else to tell you. That's when you really improve. So it's taking control of yourself and making sure you're honest with yourself.
That makes absolute sense. What you're essentially saying is being yourself and being true to yourself. That breeds authenticity 100%. As well. And if you're pretending to be something constantly that you're not, then it's not real and it's not going to have as much meaning and it's not going to be as good as it could be.
One of the things I say to my chefs, I said, I don't want you to do it in the same style as me. Do it as yourself. The moment you do it as yourself, of course, you do it with much more authority and much more presence and much more honesty.
So embracing their own personal uniqueness.
Yes.
Okay. What a lovely way to end this interview. Thank you so, so much, John. I really appreciate you doing this for us. And I'm sure everyone who's been listening has been thoroughly inspired by everything that you've done, not only for, the legacy you've created within the culinary world and within the Ritz, but also to inspire others who are coming up through the ranks and who want to be able to actually start to learn and develop themselves and, be better at what it is that they are doing, whether it's chefing, whether it is... They absolutely will be. And just finally, to super quickly summarise, and again, we'll put all of the notes from today's session into the information on the website. So you can visit www.dialglobal.org/podcast, or you can visit us on our Dial Global YouTube channel. In addition, I've learned such a lot from speaking to John. In fact, I learn something every single time I come and speak with John. And so, it's always a treat to sit here in the kitchens and to see and smell all the wonderful things and people that are going around everywhere. But I think one thing that I've really taken away is the fact that actually it's so true what John says. It's the harder that you work, the luckier you get. And really, cultivating those opportunities through putting in the time and effort required is so incredibly important. And you know what, if you are just starting out, or if you are actually an executive working for a business already, I'm sure that there is something you can learn from the conversation that we've had today, because it doesn't matter where you come from, what background you've come from, where you've been across the country, even up in the northeast, as the son of a fisherman, or come from, a lowly background. Actually, John is living legend and proof that you can be what you want to be if you're willing to put in the time, hard work and dedication. So like John said, pick something that you're really passionate about and try and enjoy it, because when you really enjoy it, it's not a job, it's a way of life. My name's Leila Mackenzie, and you've been listening to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the Fireside Chat. The podcast is also with you every week, so please do tune in and please subscribe. We're so grateful for your following and also for you taking the time to check us out. Thank you so much from the team and I at Dial Global, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.